Hello everyone. Welcome to the 18th edition of Film Bazaar. Our next session in knowledge series is Unlocking Global Funds for Aspiring Filmmakers. We would like to welcome the speakers, Chris Payne, Head of Co-Production and Incentives, New Zealand Film Commission. Elan Girard, producer, consultant, financing expert, founder and CEO, Arsam and Olfi.com. Mr. Prathul Kumar, Joint Secretary, Broadcasting and MD NFDC. And Anixa Moody, Head of the International Relations BFI. Unfortunately, we do not have Wonsun Shin with us here. I would like to welcome you all. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's very nice to see all of you here. Can everybody hear me? Yes? I'm Larissa Goodmanis. I head up the International Financing Forum at TIFF, which is the co-production, co-financing market that happens every year in September. I am very pleased to be here, and thank you to Film Bazaar for having me. The panel discussion today is Unlocking Global Funds for Aspiring Filmmakers, which is aspiring filmmakers, also medium filmmakers, senior filmmakers. You're all involved in terms of the funding process. As there are many funding sources, it can sometimes be very confusing and difficult to navigate these funding sources. So that's why we have these esteemed panelists today to discuss how we can navigate these sometimes difficult waters. But we're going to put a positive spin on this. And I have a couple of questions for the audience. I actually have a few. One being, who here has not produced a feature film? Okay, only a few. How many people have produced one feature film? Great. And how many have produced 2 or 3 feature films? Okay, so we have a good mix of an audience, and we can speak to emerging filmmakers and senior filmmakers. So, to get started, my questions will be first to Agnieszka Moody at the BFI. She is the head of international relations. And my first question to you is, what main public funding sources are available in the UK?
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Yes. Thank you so much for having me at the Film Bazaar. It's my second time. Last year I was here with a sizable group of British producers who all enjoyed their time and the contacts that they made in India, discovered really fascinating stories that they're hoping could be told together in collaboration. I haven't yet heard about those films being completed, but the conversations are ongoing. And this is why I'm here this year again, to reinforce that message that we can work together. We have a co-production treaty signed between our countries, which means that our governments have seen it a priority for us to have this easier way of collaborating and introduce the rules that would facilitate that collaboration. So if you engage in a co-production with a UK-based producer, it means that the public funding which exists in the UK does become available for that film, which is a collaboration between you. So we thought that it would be good to have a very brief overview of what's there in the UK in terms of public funding. So where I work, it's British Film Institute, which is the main agency for film and moving image. And we do distribute funds for a variety of projects, not only just production, but many other areas such as skills, audiences, film education, and so forth. But what you would be interested in is that the BFI runs two funds that support production phase of projects. They are both applicable to UK companies that you would be working with, and they're quite different. One is the BFI Filmmaking Fund, whose job is primarily to nurture our domestic talent, support them, especially when they are a bit earlier in their careers. We look for projects with creative excellence, with risk-taking, with new perspectives, underrepresented groups. All that matters for the Filmmaking Fund. And here I could, with delight, mention two projects that were with Indian subject matter and Indian talent that were supported by this fund, and it's Santosh and Sister Midnight. Right, so that's how we can make it work. And then there's another fund, which is called UK Global Screen Fund. And I would like you to take a good note of it, because this is more focused on co-productions, and in particular co-productions where the UK co-producer is a minority one. They help you with the projects that are led by you, right? So here there are slightly different criteria. It is more about, we support UK producer to board the project that will bring them good business and revenues. So there should be a bit more sort of connected to the audience and promising some kind of return, those co-productions. So depending on a project, your UK co-producer will guide you which of those funds is more applicable to the specific setup that you've got. Apart of the BFI, there are other agencies across the UK, because UK is 4 nations, and there's also regional agencies across the UK in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and also in the regions in England. One other significant, I'm nearly done. One other significant source of funding is tax incentives that operate with regards to UK spend. Whatever is spent in the UK, the government gives you a little bit back for it. So that applies to domestic productions, incoming productions, and also co-productions. And we've had recently quite a positive development in that sphere, where the rate of the tax relief for independent film has been increased to 30%, and that includes co-productions. So we've got another tool now to make co-producing with the UK more attractive. And finally, I would just like to mention in that mix 2 public service broadcasters in the UK that support film to a significant degree, and it's BBC Film and Film 4. Hopefully these are known brands because they're kind of known around the world. So that would be the summary of different sources you can tap into.
Great, thank you, Agnieszka. I do have a question. The UK and India have had a co-production treaty since 2005, and yet we are still awaiting the first completed official co-production under this treaty. And why is this?
Okay, I'll try to put the positive spin on this.
Sometimes
okay.
there isn't one, but you can try.
Yes, absolutely. Well, the truth is that co-production works when there's mutual benefit. So what has been a real game changer is the incentives introduced quite recently in India that make the co-production work. Because for all those years when there weren't incentives, why would you bother to set up a co-production if it can be supported only on one side? You can collaborate, but for co-production you need to combine public funding from both countries. And now it's perfectly possible. It's even with regards to those recent successes like Santos and Sister Midnight, they were just a bit too early, right? Like this year, they would have probably benefited from and have gained that official co-production status. So I hope that they will come, and they are in the pipeline already. The collaborations are there. Maybe another, because I'm trying to be frank and practical, right? We are far away. The air travel is expensive and also kills the planet. So we're more mindful of that. And the more we work online, the better we can collaborate across such huge different distances. The systems are also quite different. We collaborate a lot in Europe with each other. You will hear from Milan about this, but it's all very familiar, it's all very similar. So then it's easy. Whereas between us, we still have to learn about each other's ecosystem so that we can really collaborate. Production costs are very different. And on co-production, it's really quite difficult to square it out. However, what we stand on is a very solid base of cultural proximity and the stories that we can tell together. If that is there at the base, everything else will be sorted. The rest is not a problem if we have those stories that are in the shared space that will resonate with audiences in each country and beyond. And what I'm hearing and what our producers have heard last year is that there's plenty of those stories. And what's also important is that they need to be told from a new perspective, from contemporary filmmakers' perspective of today. And we're completely ready to work with you so that those stories can come to the fore.
Okay, thank you so much. I just have a quick question. How long does it usually take to get a co-production certificate at the BFI? How long does that take?
It's a long wait now because there's such a huge demand for all sorts of certificates, not just for co-productions, but for all productions. So I think it's something like 18 weeks.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Agnieszka. We will now move on to Chris Payne from the New Zealand Film Commission. My question to you, Chris, is what are the key requirements and benefits of the New Zealand-India official co-production treaty?
Thank you very much. Kia ora koutou, ko Chris Payne tōku ingoa. Hi everybody, I'm Chris Payne. I'm the head of co-production and incentives at the New Zealand Film Commission, Te Tumu Whakata Taonga. It's a great pleasure to be here. It's my first time in India, first time at Film Bazaar, and I'm very excited by the conversations that I'm having, the people that I'm meeting, and the opportunities for collaboration. So we have had a co-production treaty with India since 2011. We have had one co-production already produced under that treaty, and it's not a competition with Agnieszka, but, and actually Ilan had a role in that co-production. It was a film called Beyond the Known World, and it was directed by Pan Nalin, who did Samsara and a lot of amazing films that you'll be very aware of. So this treaty effectively gives the film or the TV show a passport in both India and New Zealand. And what that means is that it can access all of the same benefits that a domestic film or TV show can in New Zealand. In our case, as a film fund, we can provide development funding and production funding to co-productions with India. We can also provide a 40% cash rebate incentive that applies to the New Zealand spend. So most of the co-productions that work with New Zealand involve up to $2.5 million in equity from us as a film fund, plus a 40% cash rebate. Our process with the rebate is very efficient. It will typically be paid out within 90 days of delivery, and our co-production certification process typically takes between 4 to 6 weeks depending on how long the other competent authority takes to process the corresponding application. The main benefits beyond the official co-production access to local funds are that it is able to benefit from increased access to incentives through not needing to meet a significant New Zealand content test. So for our 40% incentive, any official co-production does not need to meet New Zealand content requirements. So for example, Dame Jane Campion's film The Power of the Dog on Netflix is an Australia-New Zealand official co-production. Evil Dead Rise is a New Zealand-Ireland official co-production, and neither of those films involve New Zealand content, but they are New Zealand content for the purposes of our incentives. Without going into too much detail about the treaty, it is based on the idea that the most either India or New Zealand can be involved is 80%, and the least is 20%. And typically what we see is films that will shoot in one country and do post-production in the other country. Another benefit is that New Zealanders and Australians are interchangeable for co-production purposes, not for cricket or for rugby, but definitely for co-production. So if you're looking at an opportunity to work with an Australian actor or an Australian director, that is fine under the New Zealand-India co-production treaty. In terms of our development funding, we have a dedicated international co-development fund that applies to all official co-productions with New Zealand. We have 18 co-production treaties, actually 16 co-production treaties and 2 MOUs, and all of those projects, including the treaty, all of those treaties and arrangements can access development funding from us. So we're able to match the development funding that comes to a project. We have a number of projects in development, including with India, and we have one of New Zealand's top screenwriters and producers, Shuchi Kotari, and she has a project here that was selected for a partnership that we had with The Blacklist in Hollywood, and we're very excited about this project and the potential for it to hopefully be the second official co-production between New Zealand and India. Thank you.
Great, that's exciting. Very, yes. Would you like to wave at everybody? Yes, thank you. And what are the discretionary development and production funds available via the New Zealand Film Commission that are applicable to New Zealand films, as well as official co-productions with New Zealand?
Thank you.
Which includes New Zealand and India co-production treaties.
I cover that off in a high-level way, but essentially we have a funding team that invests development funds and production funds. We can provide up to $80,000 New Zealand in development finance for local feature films and also for official co-productions. Separate to that, we have the International Co-Development Fund, which can provide $50,000 in match development funding. So if you are bringing either private funding or government funding to your co-production, then we can provide contributory funding as well. And the way that tends to work is that the development funding budget is intended to be in proportion to your co-production split. So if you're developing a film that is intended as a 60% India, 40% New Zealand, then we would expect your development budget reflects that, and we would be able to support the development funding. In terms of our production finance, we have 6 funding rounds every year, and we have a funding team that assesses applications from a New Zealand producer, and then that team puts a recommendation to our board, and the board meets 6 times every year and can choose to support a staff recommendation for up to $2.5 million per feature film.
And what incentives funding is available to Indian and other international productions that are looking to shoot or produce with New Zealand?
So I touched briefly on our incentive that applies to co-production. So it's called the New Zealand Screen Production Rebate. It's a 40% cash rebate that is on qualifying New Zealand production expenditure. And that is a structure that is purely reserved for New Zealand film and TV productions and official co-productions, including those with India. That would require you to have a New Zealand co-producer who has an equity share in the film, and they apply to us for co-production approval and for the 40% rebate. And as I said, roughly 90 days after completion and delivery of the film, we are able to pay out that incentive to the New Zealand co-producer. And the way it works is that at the start of the production, there is an application made to us for provisional approval on the basis of what is intended to be spent. Our team then assesses it, and then the New Zealand producer is able to take that approval and take a loan to cash flow the production of the film. And then at the end of the process, once it's been delivered and once we've received the final application, we pay the money out to the New Zealand co-producer, who pays their lender, and they are then left with equity in the film or the TV show. So they have ownership in the film as well. The other aspect of our incentive structure is for those productions that are looking to come to New Zealand, to either film or to do post-production, and that is a 20% cash rebate. That doesn't require a co-production structure. You just come to New Zealand, spend the money, and we will pay a cash rebate back to you as the international producer.
Okay, fantastic. And the same question to you, a co-production certificate. How long does that take usually when you apply?
We have a provisional process and a final process, and both of them will take between 4 to 6 weeks. But the limiter on that...
I think he wins Agnieszka.
But I was going to say, in Agnieszka's defense, the limiter on that is that we cannot unilaterally issue approval. We have to provide approval alongside the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting or the BFI. So we will work as fast as our other competent authorities. But we can do our processing within 4 to 6 weeks, and then we're waiting for the other competent authority.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, Chris. Prithul Kumar, thank you so much for joining us today. I know you're very, very busy. And I have some questions for you. First being, what are the key funding sources that producers can tap into at the NFDC?
Let me not just answer the NFDC part, because it's actually a Government of India fund which is handled by NFDC. These are in two forms. One is of production, which is of different type of feature films or documentary or short films or children films across India. So that is domestically given to producers across India. But another, which doesn't exist as a fund, but it exists more like a grant, a cash incentive. So that is basically for any foreign producers coming into India and either doing filming in India, or they are getting into some post-production work like VFX, sound, anything. So for that, there is the cashback goes up to 40% of the spend in India, and that is limited by $3.6 million per project, which is a big thing. Now I'll just go a little detail into it, that the question which started with BFI, that why we had such an old co-production treaty and it didn't have any takers. And I'll tell you that because probably there was an incentive missing from our side, we started the incentives from the Indian side in 2022, but that was also very limited, so probably we didn't have takers. So total since 2005, since we have been giving filming permissions and incentives to filmmakers, there were hardly any incentive takers of the little ones we were giving. But ever since we have announced these big incentives in last IFI, we have more than 90 projects in which we have already committed to spend. So that is the kind of offtake, and that is the kind of response which we've had. We've not just upped the incentives. The important thing is to work in the back end so as to ensure that whatever incentives we are committing to, we can actually make them realize as soon as possible. When we were framing the guidelines, we understood that because we're not just going to cater to big business houses. We'll also be catering to small filmmakers, and it is very difficult for them to do this billing, legal work. So we kept it as simple as possible. You'll be surprised to know that for post-production work in India, the kind of guidelines which we have and the kind of paper submission which you require is actually nothing but an invoice, and that the money has been realized, supported by the contract which you had with an Indian company. That's all what you require. And we've not gone into the calculations of how much is getting spent, how much is the computer getting used, software getting used, nothing into it. So we've just said whatever you're spending, 75% of it is eligible and we give you incentive on that. So our realization of cash incentives has been really, really fast. The kind of averages which we are sitting on right now, although filmmakers also have to learn through the process, but the processes which we have completed, about 20 odd projects, they have taken an average of 65 days. So that's like 8-9 weeks. And when it comes to co-productions, the other methodology through which we do funding, so India as of now has a co-production treaty with 17 countries, along with New Zealand and UK. So there, the essence is that the funding can be done because why co-productions first of all? Because see, our stories are becoming global. So a story sometimes is required to be shot in India because there's something happening in UK or in New Zealand. So they go and shoot over there also. So these stories itself have become global. The audience is becoming much and more global. I am so glad to hear that, yes, of course, India has been a very good audience to the feature films from Hollywood, but I think a lot of acceptance is increased from Europe and other parts of the world also. Their films are also getting watched here, thanks to the OTT platforms and the kind of digital platforms available. And so is the appetite growing for Indian films outside the kind of content which is there. So that is why the countries in the official co-production treaties, they make sure that the producers from both the sides get together, use their own inherent capacities, capabilities, and try to make a film together, and in which both the countries will be supporting them. So for whatever is India has co-production treaties with, we support with up to 30% of whatever is the spend in India for any production and post-production work. And also that, the kind of approvals which are happening because of the online portal. We have recently launched a revamped portal which doesn't just take the applications online, but it also does the entire processing online. But even without that, the kind of permissions for film visa we used to do in about 18, 19 days. That's the average which the team at Film Facilitation Office, which is now called the India Cine Hub, has been really steadfastly doing that. So we believe that the incentives become a major part of getting into a co-production or availing the funding. But I also believe that the facilitation has to be there in the back end, believing that the filmmakers should be given less and less of burden of, the compliances and all that. So that has been the back end through which India has been working.
And also the same question to you, a co-production certificate. How long does that take at the NFDC once you apply?
So the co-production from our end takes around 4 to 5 weeks, not more than that in any case. Except for if there is some issue or otherwise the general is 4 weeks.
Okay, thank you. And any suggestions how producers can craft effective proposals when applying for funding at the NFDC? Do you have any tips for everybody?
No, so the entire guidelines, of course, is available on our website, and it has been very, very specifically worded and simply made, so that you can exactly find out what is the kind of qualifications, what is the kind of documents you will be required to submit, and we have sort of cleansed it up to the maximum extent possible, so that people don't have difficulty in filing. But I also believe that that these co-productions just do not happen because there are incentives available, there are policies available between countries. But I'm sure it is also because the filmmakers who are sitting here, they believe in each other and make such friendships in places like this, and they are able to make these kind of global stories. So these kind of environment also become very, very important for us, where people can actually get to meet each other and do a co-production, plan a co-production, or rather I'd say seed a co-production. So that's very important.
Okay, thank you very much. Ilan Gerard, from France. You have a website that is called olfi.com. I actually just went on it today and registered. So thank you very much for that. And I just looked at it today to see how I can navigate. It's a very, very, very interesting tool for producers. And maybe you can speak a little bit about that. And also, if you can point to the dynamics of assembling global financing to the producers in the audience.
Okay. Yeah, I can say a few words about Olfi. Actually, I'm myself a producer, but I worked for many years as a general counsel of a company financing and selling films. And so I was working with different countries and coming up with, the new financing schemes, the early days of production incentives. And so I decided that I could share this knowledge with others. And step by step, with the support of the European Union and some private investors, we built this database that is covering over 1,000 different funding programs worldwide. A large number of those programs are in Europe because we have a very complex and broad financing schemes for producer. But we are seeing more and more incentive programs being developed elsewhere. And I think we have about 15,000 producers coming on this platform worldwide, 1/3 in North America. And myself, I am a regular at the Film Bazaar. I'm running workshop, explaining to producer how to navigate those funding schemes, but also, and that's coming to your next point, how to develop, a relationship with foreign producer. And starting, by understanding what they have to offer. I think it's really important that we start with the dynamic of the project itself. What is the concept behind a project? Because this concept is going to travel to audiences. You have this creative aspect, but you have also a lot of legal aspects that you have to look into, because to enter into an international co-production, what is really important to understand is that you need to take into account the very complex criteria of all those funds. So you need to look at what are the criteria of your project in terms of qualification, what is the criteria of the producer you work with, so that you can combine different financing. If you don't anticipate from the development stage those different elements, you will find yourself stranded at some point. So maybe take some advice, maybe look on my database, but it's really important to anticipate those elements. I also want to mention something about financing, is that we've been talking about official co-production treaties, but a lot of Indian films have been funded outside of co-funded outside of that scheme. Because in Europe, and actually the UK Global Screen Fund could be qualified as what I would call world cinema funds. So those funds don't require official co-production status. They usually require that you spend at least 50% of the money they gave you in the foreign country, but they will look at the quality of the project. So it is a qualitative funding. It's very competitive. And you have those funds in France, in the UK, in Germany, in many other countries. It's very important for Indian producer to understand that going to those funds requires a co-producer, but also require a very high level of quality for the script. This competition is, very tough, and the film we've mentioned, they've benefited from this type of funding. So that's been so far one of the key source of co-financing with India. I'm not talking about, commercial film. I'm talking about those art house films that travel to festival and that, are building up a certain kind of community around the film, public funds, development, workshop, labs, etc. Certain broadcasters in Europe, I mean, would be Channel 4, BBC, Arte in France, and also some of the festivals, you know, executives that will be tracking those films. So you would not be surprised from very early stage, actually from those meetings now at the Film Bazaar. I wouldn't say I can tell which film are going to go through the entire journey, but the quality of the material is really important.
That's great, thank you. But what advice would you give to producers about cultivating global relationships in terms of their feature films that are in development and they are looking for funding?
That's a complex question.
Yes, it is, isn't it?
I would say...
And we only have a couple of minutes left.
I would say that what is really important is to understand what each party can bring to the other and how you can you may derive mutual benefits. A French producer like me is looking at an Indian project because I am curious about something, a story, you know, I received from India. I think there's some kind of universal element in that story that could be understood in my country for my audience. For me, the formula is sometimes, you know, a universal story in a very specific surrounding. But also, I want to bring some input. I'm not only there to bring money. So this dynamic is really important. And actually, you may find that sometimes it's not adjusted throughout the process. And this is also why some of the film, you know, gets stranded a little bit. Because this dynamic is not nurtured by a relationship between partners. And it's, you know, it's like in a couple. You need to talk. You need to sit and talk what's not functioning well, what are the aspirations. Maybe the European producer, take my example, we know a bit better about editing, about marketing. We know what our audiences, you know, would look for. Sometimes actually those films have very little market space in India, but they bring, you know, they project India outside of India. For commercial films, it would be a different setup, of course. So I really encourage you to build up this relationship, but also, you know, to be prepared with what you propose to your partners, prepared with understanding the regulatory setup of your cooperation, but also prepared to discuss, you know, as things goes on, because especially very often we're dealing with producer, director, writer, and it's very difficult for that person to take some distance with, you know, what is a huge commitment, a huge investment. So that would be my advice.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. That's very interesting. Agnieszka, you had something to say?
I just wanted to add to this that in international collaboration, especially when we talk about the whole world, not just neighbors, the first thing is open mind and not assuming that in the other country things are done the same way, right? The crews are different. The money works different way. You really have to be quite open, and there's no worse or better. It's just that both of you, if you want to work together, need to acknowledge those differences and see how they can harmoniously live together.
Great, thank you. We have time for 2 quick questions from the audience. Does anybody have any questions for any of the panelists?
Hello. My voice is audible? My name is Shubhanshu Satyadev. I am a director. My question is, like, how to pitch proper, like, we have made a film, okay, which is based on rag pickers, underprivileged children, and they wanted to go to school. So we wanted to know how to get exhibition or distribution network to explore international market. can you give us a brief idea or a small idea related to this? Because you all have come all the way from India, so please, can you give some idea related to this?
Maybe I would try to answer your question. I think you need to think about distribution when you start your project. If you are thinking about distribution when you're trying to find completion fund, it may be very difficult. So you need to get your film on the radar of international sales agents, distributors, people would exploit the film in your own market. It's called benchmarking. You need to do that very early on. If you wait the last minute, it will be problematic. The festival might help you, of course. Festival selection might help you, but if you carefully check which film goes to festival, you'll see that those films very often have gone through a very specific journey with, workshop, labs, development funding, international funding, etc., and a group of international producers being after the film. And then, of course, they will end in a festival and they will have distribution. So it's very important to look at that very early on. Otherwise, the money that has been, expended in developing and producing the film might be lost.
Good evening. Thanks to all. I am Raj Mohan Subramanian from Chennai. I have a question. Regarding the co-production, in what level we had start our progress, whether in developing a story level or pre-production or post-production, production level, in what level it's feasible to start?
Let me answer
Yeah,
this.
I have a question. To apply for a co-production, in which level? It's a pre-production level or post-production level or developing a story, that initial level itself we can try.
At what all levels
Absolutely.
he's saying he can?
So I'll answer that. So you can actually start at any level. So if it is a pre-production, so if you want to start shooting, you can always apply for co-production and you can get the co-production and start shooting. That's one way of doing it. But in our case, especially in India, like even if you want to do some post-production, at that point in time, you can get into a co-production and apply for that.
Maybe I can add from UK's perspective is that it really will be in the story, and the earlier the better. You know on the basis of the screenplay whether it is a local film. I know local sounds very different in India than it does in the UK or any European country. But if there is kind of reason to make it international, it will be in the story. And the most successful co-productions are not those that have thought about it last minute, but from early on. Ideally, producers should develop the project together and then go on that journey all the way. I think that's how it sounds.
That's correct. So that's why even all the countries, they give interim approvals. So, before you start the work, you get something in hand, a sort of in principle approval that you will be able to get this kind of a funding.
We have time for
Yes.
one more question.
Yes.
Yes.
So I have an Indo-US feature, and as I understand, the United States does not have a treaty with India. If I'm not wrong, it doesn't have a treaty with many countries. No country, yes. But I do see that India has a lot of treaties with different countries. And my question is there a way to involve, say, a third-party country and leverage on those treaties? Maybe post-production could be one, but as Sir said, I would rather have that in my home country and get 75% rebate there. But is there another way, per se, to involve the UK in this production and leverage on the treaty?
So all of New Zealand's co-production treaties have the ability to add other countries. So, and the way it normally works is that either New Zealand or the other country has to have a co-production arrangement with the third country. So for example, you could do a New Zealand, India, UK co-production. You could do a New Zealand, India, France co-production. The key requirement is that there is an arrangement in place. It would not be possible to do an official co-production that was New Zealand, India, US, because you're right that the US has no co-production arrangements.
I think in your treaties as well, there is a bit allowance of a spend in a third country, which really means, well, you would only use it if that country provides some money for that spend. But if US were to contribute some money, that would enable, for example, a few days shooting there, or would pay for a cast member or crew member, there is a bit of a room in a co-production treaty. So let's say it's UK-India co-production with an American actor. And the money for that actor could come from the US, and you work it into the official co-production, which is between UK and, or same for you, right? It's
Exactly the same for us. And the only point I'd make in terms of what Agnieszka makes is that there could not be an American full producer in that structure. There could be American finance, but from the New Zealand Film Commission's point of view, that American producer would have to be an executive producer, associate producer, anything that is not a full producer.
Yeah. So you have to look at the copyright ownership. You know, it can be limited. It has to be limited to a certain percentage so that you don't jeopardize the co-production structure. And with some countries, Canada is about the same. With some countries, the American partner, which is not an official co-producer, cannot be named as a producer, which is a problem. Okay. So, you know, it's not only about, you know, where the money goes and the profit sharing, etc. Because sometimes, you know, the ownership is somewhere, but the revenue is somewhere else because, you know, the investors is recouping his money. But you have to be very careful. And this is why, when you set up your production, you have to think about with a writer, with a director, with a producer, very early on, so that you don't jeopardize your ability to enter into international partnership under an official formula.
And we're talking about official co-productions here. I just make the final point that we are also involved in unofficial co-productions and joint ventures, which don't have any of those requirements. So an American producer is fine in a joint venture or an unofficial co-production.
Great, thank you, Chris, and thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for attending this panel session. Have a good evening, and enjoy the rest of Film Bazaar. Thank you.
Thank you to our esteemed panelist and moderator for a truly insightful and engaging session. I hope you all enjoyed today's discussion and gained valuable takeaways. This is Kanika Mithil signing off for the day. Don't forget to join us tomorrow at 9:45 a.m. for another exciting edition of the Knowledge series on filmmaking and the dynamic world of Film Bazaar. Until then, stay inspired and see you all tomorrow. Thank you.
Shokri is the native language of the Chakasang Naga tribe. It is an ancient and beautiful language passed on from generation to generation.